Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is Tracy Mohr, who I've met, and I don't think she even remembers where we met, but we met, and then we met again, and now we're having a conversation. And I'm really happy to have you here, Tracy. I'm impressed with who you are and the work that you're doing with your partners in your new business, and you're right here in Winston-Salem, where I live and where I grew up and now live again. And so glad to have you here.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
So give us an idea of what kind of work you do. We know you live here, but what kind of work is it that you do?
Well, right now in this particular moment, in the last year, I have collaborated with two gentlemen to start a nonprofit consulting firm called Nonprofit Solutions. But probably a more interesting um, sort of conversation for me to share would be the predicate that led to the
Yes.
creation of the firm. And it has to do with a love of community, a very up close and up to my eyeballs experience with starting a nonprofit, or actually, to be precise, um, I had the fortune to be connected with a group of folks that were doing a seasonal winter shelter for homeless individuals who were unsheltered. And even if they wanted to be sheltered, there would not be room for them. It was called the Overflow Shelter. And so I got to know this group of really dynamic individuals, leaders I bet you will eventually meet in our community, who were probably in their second or third winter, and they wanted to take the effort to a year round outreach to homeless individuals. And the founding principle was they wanted to build community with individuals who struggled to find community.
Hmm.
So that meant a sense of place. And when a homeless individual or an individual who was struggling with homelessness was ready to set goals and connect to services, we would be equipped and ready to help them to their next step. Um, Met the most wonderful volunteers, and just really enjoyed the energy and meeting so many different people in the community who volunteered, who had such a love of people and a desire to lift others up. Um, I find myself most inspired by people who give of their time and their gifts and um, their ability to love people where they are. And so that was sort of the whole, um, I guess, vibe is the hip word, but that was kind of the foundation on which City with Dwellings was built, and loved every minute of it. Um, Became transitional executive director, and the pandemic hit, and it extended for a longer period of time. And then I transitioned out of that. And since then, I've done different projects for nonprofits, and worked for a short while in doing a little bit of development work for Habitat, and connected with Ned Erickson and
Yeah.
Bruce Wissinger,
Yeah.
who both, pardon me,
Yes.
and we all sort of had the same energy around this sense that smaller nonprofits, probably in the 500,000 to maybe $2 million budget range,
Uh-huh.
um, struggled struggled around fundraising, development, donor relationship building, grant writing, all the pragmatic
Hmm.
pieces that I remember and have enormous empathy. Um, I remember as an ED and lots of executive directors I have conversations with, they struggle to find time to do that type of work as well. Most of them desire to, um, but have a hard time with an on ramp to do it because as an executive director of a smaller nonprofit, a lot of these men and women walk in the door and can be hit with anything. Like they can plan to write all their notes and all their letters to donors. They can plan on making phone calls to express gratitude and thanks, and connect to see if somebody wants to meet for coffee. And they can walk in and the plumbing has gone crazy. And they don't have an operations person. They're the operations person. So our goal is to work with small nonprofits and help them build sustainable donor bases, sustainable sources of funding. One of my loves is communicating mission in ways that captures people's imagination and attention. And so help them build those plans into like an annual fund calendar and just integrate the effort so that it's a natural outgrowth of the mission of the organization.
You
If
raise,
that makes sense. That was a lot of words.
well, it prompts so many different questions in my mind. Because
Okay.
I've had experience in that world, like you were in, and saw a lot of the same sort of things. Spent a lot of time with homeless people. Um, Spent a lot of time with nonprofits, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that the people's perception of nonprofits and of the people that they serve is really not very clear, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
adequate to the support these organizations need. Let me ask you several questions. I want to go back.
Okay.
I want to go back to when you were running the shelter because I think that's really. I think we're going to see more homelessness in the future than we have seen in the past. I think we're headed in that
I,
direction. So tell
I think you're right.
help us. Let's say the people that are watching or listening have never had any interaction with someone who is homeless. What does that look like? Describe that kind of life context of someone who is without a roof over their head.
Um, any one of us are a number of steps away from being in the same situation. Um, and so there's no one set um, definition or type of person that can find themselves homeless. However, there are circumstances that can propel someone into a situation like homelessness. From a very pragmatic perspective, our lack of affordable housing is one of those things. Um, I can tell you the best way to explain it is maybe to tell you some very brief narratives or sort of descriptions of some individuals that I met
I love that. Yeah.
who were homeless. Met one older gentleman who had worked for Reynolds for probably 25 years or longer. And he still had his ID card. And he had worked for Reynolds for years and lost his job. Um, and then his wife passed away, and he struggled with alcoholism. And I think when I really got to know him, I think he had one sister who was still alive, but had grown up in a big family of maybe 7 or 8 children. Um, Sweet, just sweet and kind, and just couldn't get out of his own way with his disease, the alcoholism.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, we just loved on him, and volunteers, really enjoyed spending time with him and getting to know him. And there's no fixing anyone. There's just trying your best to be present. And that was sort of the year-round sort of purpose, was just to have a place, because the only sheltering we did was not on site. It was at other churches who were so generous to offer their space. December through March. Um, there was another woman who was probably around my age who um, her daughter got married and was pregnant, and she and her husband were killed in a head-on car collision. And this woman never recovered.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and that was hard. So if she were 20 years prior, would never have imagined herself in the situation that she was in. And she just really struggled to find solid ground from there. There was another young man um, who struggled with drug addiction and just really had a hard life. And he had burned a lot of bridges in terms of his family. Um, and that's what you see a lot of in the homeless community is um, people have extended offers to support and help. And maybe they're doing it in the wrong way, who knows? But their efforts have fallen short. And it's not that they've given up, it's just they've maybe created boundaries for themselves in terms of their relationship with whether it's a brother or sister or even a child. Um, and I've watched I watched that individual and um, you see just glimpses of who people really are sometimes. And you could just see this bright spirit inside of him that just had never been able to actualize. And he would prostitute himself for drugs, and he homeless people are victims of crimes at a much higher rate than your average person. And so, he was, beaten up on a number of occasions and just really struggled. And we were all pulling so hard for him. But he died maybe 4 years ago. And I had just transitioned out of See with Dwellings, and we had a service for him in the parking lot. And it was a beautiful service. But so those are three examples of all different ages, different genders, different races who found themselves in this place and they just could not get out. Um, Again, the lack of housing, what we learned in a really neat pandemic forced experiment was that when people stabilize in a housing, regardless of what kind of housing, they tend to thrive. Um, City with Dwellings was able to partner with Bethesda and Samaritan, the Continuum of Care, the United Way, and we um, had a hotel for medically fragile homeless people. Most of them, many of them were older. I can't remember the number, maybe it was 40 individuals in a hotel. And I remember we had all these volunteers that would make homemade desserts and all kinds of neat things. And we were masked and we were gloved. It was at that heightened place where we were just super aware of the potential to expose the more vulnerable populations. And I can remember having my daughters go over with me and taking this sort of push cart around with all these goodies on them that had been made for these folks.
Mm-hmm.
And the residents would open the door, and the transformation was astounding. The physical transformation, that rest, reliable meals,
Mm-hmm.
because people were there was an outpouring of support for this effort that just was very humbling. But their physical self, they were standing up straighter. They would smile really big because they had that sense of security, maybe that they just hadn't had for who knows how long. Um, but that was a beautiful thing to see, and to me, a very telling kind of indicator of what people can become when they have the right supports and resources in place, um, to
Sounds
maybe get
like
to the next step in their life.
it sounds like there's a convergence that takes place that puts people in that vulnerable position. One is the loss of a dwelling to live in, and the other is the loss of the ability to take care of yourself. You don't have the money to take care of yourself, or maybe you have been dependent upon a family to kind of provide a location of support where you're able to manage getting through hard times, and then that's gone, and all of a sudden you're alone and you're by yourself, and there's nothing to hold on to, and you're now part of the growing numbers of people who are homeless.
Hmm.
I have a I have,
That's a great that's a great synopsis. Yeah.
I have a friend. She's no longer with us. I have a friend who she was a journalist in Colorado, and I think it was her father who died, and it was a particularly hard had a hard effect upon her, and so she decided that she would go and spend a season, not months, but a period of time living in her van. That's very popular today, but this is, 20 years ago. And what happened was she found herself homeless, and she found that it was extraordinarily difficult to escape that homelessness because of the cost of just the entry into finding a place to live. The cost of deposits on rent, deposits on electricity, deposits on water, deposits on gas, all those things require deposit.
Hmm.
And you have to, and if you're on a very limited income, and so she spent basically the rest of her life in some mode of being without a normal traditional home to live in. The last time I saw her, she had taken up residence in the office of a one of these storage facilities.
Oh,
It had
okay.
it had a full bath in the office, and she lived in the office. And then she developed I think she developed cancer and wasn't able to survive that.
Mm.
But that's for her it wasn't the lack of housing. It really was a trauma that she had gone through. And so the question I have about this, see, I look at our community, and I'm asking, so how do people who are in a traumatic state in their life, where do they go to find help? And I know that probably the city or the county health department or they probably have help, but they can't provide everything for someone particularly someone who now feels very alienated from all the institutional structures that are in the community. So
Hmm.
what happens in that situation where someone needs help, but it's really difficult for them to find it?
Um, that's a great question, and there's no single answer, because it often can depend on, the person's situation. Are they a parent? Do they have a child? Um, but for simplicity's sake, let's just say it's a single individual and um, they've wound up homeless. And usually there's been a path there, where they may have slept on friends' sofas. They may have stayed with a relative, but all of their options have been depleted. And they can call, the community intake. There's a number you can call and sort of identify yourself as homeless, and become part of a database, that sort of helps track and navigate the services you access, which sounds so clinical and impersonal, but sometimes that can help agencies that help understand how they can better meet needs. But so the first step is to try to find a shelter, for you to stay in, and that is Samaritan or Bethesda and Salvation Army, and in some cases, Family Services. Salvation Army does shelter families. That's usually a temporary proposition. I want to say maybe 3 6 months.
Hmm.
And there are caseworkers and people who, who are connected to those shelters who do wonderful work trying to find an on ramp for someone to find a place to live. And that usually requires that caseworker to corral a lot of resources. Um, Transitional housing options, permanent supportive housing, which is something that's actually, I think, a strong program that is designed for people who are disabled or unable to work or only able to work part time, but require maybe some supportive services. And that could be a medical bus, coming by, or a nurse checking on them once a week
Right.
to do blood pressure and just some basic vitals. But so there are different sort of options that can be potential on ramps to stability. Um, but it's hard. Um,
Let me ask you another question. Um,
sure.
when I lived in Asheville and Hendersonville, our church, First Presbyterian in downtown Asheville, in the winter would do a Saturday meal because the where all the agencies that were serving homeless people or people who needed food were closed on Saturday afternoons. So we opened up and we'd fix a full meal for people and um and we would serve from like 1 to 4, something like it was, about 3 hours. And what we found was we had homeless people who were permanently homeless. We had people who lived in the government subsidized apartment towers that were near the church. And then we had people who were itinerants who were passing through Asheville. And a lot of them were really young people who all had drug problems. So it was a very interesting mix of people, and the dynamic between them was really interesting. And what happened was the people who were in the apartment towers, who they were living in a much healthier situation. They ended up being the ones who basically ran the social environment of this group. I mean, there would be 100 people in the fellowship hall or so maybe, and so they would
Mm-hmm.
they would they would secure what was going on because they knew that if there was trouble, the church would probably end the program. And it was really interesting to see that social dynamic of what I would consider maybe the lower class of the community, actually monitoring and taking care of its environment. And I
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's often missed when we talk about a community and the people in the community and what happens when you have all these people who are quite vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. That story sounds familiar. I mean,
I'm
we
sure
would
it does.
see the same things. The component of that that population that struggles with, we call it dual diagnoses, which is alcoholism and mental illness. They're the hardest cases. I learned so much throughout that time in my life, but one of the things I learned is that most homeless cases resolve themselves. Um, if an individual gets to a place where they report themselves as homeless, I think that's a really low and vulnerable moment. Um, and they're a little more visible, I think, to just your average person walking downtown. But yeah, we found individuals would be very protective of volunteers and staff, and really kind of police each other. Um,
So this experience that you had of entering into this world of homelessness, becoming the executive director of this organization for a period of time. Um, what was it that surprised you about this, based on what your previous experience in life had been? Was there anything that surprised you, and how did it change you?
Um, Surprised me. Well, maybe not surprised, but my belief in the goodness of people was affirmed.
Uh,
Um,
I like that.
and my sense that in crisis, people will run to it to help. Um, and people sincerely want to help. Um, there was less of it existed, trust me, but like there was less of the paternal or maternal, like I know what's best
Hmm.
attitude on behalf of volunteers. And I have to sort of step back and say that I was not a frontline program person. And so I kind of stood back in awe of um, colleagues that I worked with, like Lee Tolberry, and just just Krista and just neat people. And then each church that sheltered folks in the winter had a point pastor, and they tended to be younger, and they were a dynamic group of people. I was the What was odd for me was I was the establishment. Like I had to like make sure we were complying. I had to make sure we were good tenants, and whomever was our landlord was felt like I was responsive to their frequent issues. I mean, I'm not going to say they were
Oh,
complaints, but frequent issues because it's a hard population.
yes, it is.
Um, and so, um, and I guess I think I really was, I learned um, just how hard it is for someone to overcome such circumstances, um, and how people find themselves in those circumstances. Um,
So this section of your life that has given you this experience has moved you into this next section of your life as you and these two guys have started this new organization, which I celebrate.
mhm.
When you shared that with me the other day, I thought, oh, I really, I really liked it. I really liked that you were stepping out to create something that you obviously saw was a need, and obviously everywhere I've lived, there's been a need for what you three are going to do or are doing. So uh,
Mhm.
let's talk about that because let's talk about what you're doing, and then maybe what you hope to see as a long-term product of what you're doing. Okay, describe this new organization that you and Ned and Bruce are doing.
Well, we are a small consulting firm that wants to elevate and meet the needs of smaller nonprofits that find themselves in situations where, due to high staff turnover, the development profession, I think the average tenure is, I think it's down to 14 months.
Hmm.
Um, and to, and to be successful in that role, I'm currently taking classes through the Lilly School of Philanthropy, and you know, to be an effective fundraiser development person, um, it takes at least a year and a half to kind of get acclimated to not only the organization but the donor base, and the executive director style. Um, and then to really take off, you've got at least another year and a half, 3 years. And so that continuity and consistency can really help a donor database kind of grow. Um, and then there's a gap because executive directors are stretched so thin that it's really difficult for them to maintain consistency in donor outreach and development and fundraising. And so we, all three of us, have a variety of diverse experiences in fundraising. Like I worked for Wake Forest in development, and my one of my first development jobs was for the March of Dimes, where I did events. So and just multiply that by 10 and or 20 and spread that between Bruce, Ned, and I. And so we feel like we can offer not only support and guidance and some structure, but we can actually help some of the help EDs take some of those steps that are really hard. Like I can write a letter just like that, but I can remember trying to change gears and write an appeal letter or write a anything, and I would just freeze. And so one of the things that we like to do for clients is kind of help them get ahead of the queue, get ahead of the game a little bit, because EDs always feel like they're backstroking into the wall, and they're going to hit the wall at any minute because there's just no, they're always behind and they're always in a hurry, um, and that is part of the attraction to nonprofit work is it's full of energy and excitement and successes among the struggles. People that work in nonprofit are typically really neat people to get to know. And so I love that about what we're doing. And we're getting to know a diverse number of agencies that are doing things I haven't been exposed to, which I'm enjoying that learning process. But one of sort of the underlying hopes that we have is to maybe shepherd young people, like maybe graduates of college or technical school who want to get into development, to help them understand the role and kind of the trajectory path of the profession. Because an entry level development person, there's going to be a lot of administrative work, a lot of sort of that function of the work. Um, and it's important for the ED and that person to have a good relationship, but the ED often lacks the ability to mentor and coach and help that young person develop. So we actually have one group that we're working with now where we're working with a recent graduate, and I'm really enjoying working with her. So that's a hope. But Winston's kind of in this market where, the salary for a really good development person is just out of reach for this nonprofit budget group. Um, so, we enjoy the work. We'll do some board development and help EDs maybe engage their board more effectively,
Mhm.
engage the community, grow donors, understand how to work with major donors and retention and all those things that are really difficult in today's environment. So, um, and I would, I think I'm pretty well within the bounds of being able to say I feel like each one of us feels called to this kind of work. That we're at a place in our lives where um, this is how we want to share our gifts and our time. So we're not out to get, we're not billing at $300 an hour rate.
I don't know Bruce very
But
well.
it's kind of an outgrowth.
I don't know
um,
Bruce very well, but I know Ned pretty well, and he's been on the
yeah.
podcast. You all are definitely committed, and you're examples, I think, for other people. I don't know a lot, and I've only been back in Winston-Salem a year, so I don't know a lot. But I find in most communities that there will be leadership programs for people in the community.
Mhm.
They're not really helping them gain the experience of leadership. They're learning the theories of leadership. They're learning the mechanics of leadership, but that's not the same thing as the of of kind of becoming embodied as a leader. And what does that mean? If you're, say, the head of a nonprofit, and you go to the movies, and you're standing in the lobby of the movie theater, and all of a sudden you see one of your donors, and so how do you
I
interact?
lost your audio a little bit there. And
Did I lose you? Did it be
well,
okay? Let
yeah,
me.
I'm trying to think when you sort of froze up.
I
Yeah.
Oh my, it's doing to us again. Let me start over and we'll go back. Uh,
Okay.
I'm going to go back to where we started talking about leadership in the community. About
Mm-hmm. Okay.
so I love what you're doing, and I think it's really important and it's really valuable. I know Ned really well. He's been on the podcast. Don't know Bruce as well, but we've had a couple of interactions, and I like him, and so I think what you all are doing is important. I think the challenge of every community that I've ever lived in is in how do you equip people for leadership, and typically the leadership programs are very oriented around theory and methodology and practices, but not so much the experience. And how do you walk into a situation as the leader of that organization and create the experience of leadership that everyone shares? And I think that's a major thing. It's like, so if you're, say you're the executive director of a nonprofit, and you and your family go to the movies, and you're standing in the lobby, and over there is one of your donors. So what do you do? Do you go over and talk to the donor, or you just wave, or are you passive, or do you go and talk to them? Do you take your family over and introduce them? This person is helping us be successful in what we're doing in our mission. How do you interact with people in the community in such a way as they begin to feel like they are joining you in this mission of that the organization has defined, so that they say, I really like being a part of this. I feel like I'm making a contribution. I'm a part of something that really makes a difference that matters.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing is
So
and
yeah, it's all in based on the individual and the relationship you've been able to develop over time. But I would have to say, it starts with humility, leadership does. And in terms of donor relationships, I think not fire hosing a donor with all that and all the numbers and all the stats and your enthusiasm. Um, you ask questions and you learn about them a little bit, because by learning about them, you'll tease out what drew them to your organization. Um, and in terms of like developing a nonprofit, I would have to say, I learned by making lots of mistakes, but just being curious about people and being willing to listen to questions from donors and people that are interested that may not have the context and understanding of whatever issue you're trying to address with someone. Mental health might be one. Um, and just try to listen to what they're really asking, even if it sounds wrapped up in maybe judgment or frustration. Why can't they just get a job? Or but to understand, that they showed up, the volunteer or the person that's interested in what you're doing, they took the time to show up. So that's already a curiosity that exists, and to try to nurture that a little bit. Um, and to keep boundaries, some healthy boundaries in place.
so let's and we're just kind of I'm picking off a list of topics that leaders of nonprofits need to think about. And one of them is just what we talked. Another one would be, so I'm the executive director and I have a board. What is it that I need to be doing with my board? And I think that's a pretty simple question. But I'm actually more interested in what you think about what board members need to be doing with their executive director. Because I think that's
Um,
where, I mean, in my experiences in running a nonprofit, that's where I had the problems was with my board. And
mhm,
and
mhm.
I ended up being fired for that because I had problems with the board.
Yeah, that story is too familiar, I think, just in the industry overall. So what can EDs, how can they engage their board and vice versa? Um, they need a job description. They need, for you to be clear on expectations. There's usually some, several, hopefully more than one or two interactions where the ED will know these individuals that are coming on the board, and typically um, proper process or bylaws dictate that maybe there's a nominating committee that kind of knows what skill sets are needed.
Mhm,
And you need some you need people with fiduciary acumen.
mhm,
I mean, they really are responsible for the organization, but it's a partnership, and um, so you need people that can help you with fundraising. You need people that are just good um, people in the community that are connected, and it's good to have them on your team. But you have to be clear on what you expect, um, and then it's work. Um, equipping someone to do the things that you need them to do to support the organization in their role. And there needs to be some adversarial kinds of, not an unhealthy tension, but um, usually a nonprofit, not usually, but often a nonprofit's looking to get to the next place. Maybe there is a alteration or a way to innovate the work they're doing. Um, Maybe not. Um, but there needs to be a place where ideas and creative conversations and hard conversations can happen in a healthy way. And that's hard. Um, you know, just saying it, I'm like, oh, that's really hard. But you need some people with experience being on boards, and ideally you would love for those more experienced, typically older individuals, maybe in their 60s, 70s, to sort of nurture younger people
yeah.
and model what it means to be on a board. Maybe help a younger person chair a committee, um, or really be a leader in a fundraising effort. Um, but it is hard. It's really it's really hard right now, and I don't know why.
Now, what is it? How should we define what a successful board looks like? Because
So commit.
I don't think
It's a good question.
I don't think it's clear because I think the motivations to be a board member are so multiple that it's difficult to create a unified board who is committed um, solely to the mission of the organization and not to some other agenda that they bring with them to the board.
Hmm. Hmm. Or it's just kind of something to put on their CV.
Or it's,
Um, so there's just needs to be a healthy relationship, and it's going to be different for every organization.
yeah, that's right.
Um, there needs to be, I just think expectations need to be clear up front. Like, do you expect that person to volunteer? Do you maybe need a couple of board members who are able and equipped to lead a class, maybe in budgeting or financial management or um, just
Should
life mapping.
should
Um,
should every board member financially contribute?
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it can be $5. Um,
Yeah.
so
And if they don't,
um,
it's a problem.
it's a hard conversation to have. It's a hard conversation to have. Um, you
Yeah.
know,
So
but
let me
yeah.
ask you another question, and this kind of brings us to a close. You're doing you and Ned and Bruce are doing this, creating this service to the community because you love the community and you want to support the nonprofits in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. And I totally support you in what you're doing. Um, what is your hope, say, after you've been doing this for 10 years? What do you hope to see as having been transformed in our community because of, in all humility, but because you are really good at what you do and you've done service to these organizations in such a way that they've improved. So what does that look like 10 years from now? I know that I'm putting you on the spot there, but I really
Well,
am curious.
um, I would love to see less need for the services provided. I would love to see more economic mobility. And there are groups out there working really hard and doing wonderful things around economic mobility. But so for a lot of the nonprofits that I'm thinking of in my mind, would love for them to be on very solid ground. I would love to see them, changing in response to needs, as the world changes, and um, you have to be nimble, and be able to pivot, when things change. We may be in a circumstance where we all have to pivot quickly, to meet needs in the community that were previously met through funding sources that might just end unexpectedly or will probably be curtailed significantly. But to see that growth mindset, um, and that um, hopeful mindset and willingness to adapt and respond, because I do see that as a strength in our nonprofit community. Um, and I would love to see more collaboration. Um, and I don't have an answer for that, but I do think there's a willingness for people of all different backgrounds, um, to know each other and be known. Um,
I like,
and so I mean, it's really idealistic, I know, and that's one of my things.
well, it's practical too.
But I would love to, well, I would love to see more understanding, and more acceptance. Um,
I
it
have
doesn't have to be super complicated.
what I have found as I'm asking people, I ask hard questions because I'm curious. I'm really curious. I'm not negative. I'm really not negative at all. And what I have found is is a general belief that this community can take on any problem it has and solve it. And that's different than it was 50 plus years ago when I grew up here.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. I'd love to. We'll have to have a conversation about that some other time that is more focused on you. Um,
And I
yeah.
say that, I'll give you one reason, is that there are people in this community who have not just started things, but they have invested in the community so that the community had the capacity to change and meet the needs that it has. Doesn't mean it's finished. I don't think we'll ever be finished, but that's what I see, and I'm very encouraged by that, and
Hmm.
um, very encouraged. And the question is, so where does this take us? Where does this take us? And I don't think we'll ever be rid of homelessness. I don't think we'll ever be rid of addiction. I don't think we'll ever be rid of the things that divide people. I don't think that will ever go away because those are so personal to people that they're not
Hmm.
just simply something that's been handed to them. Oh, you have to be this way. They don't. No, they've inadvertently or intentionally they have chosen to be this way. I mean, when my first call after seminary was to a downtown church in Atlanta where I was the community minister. So I spent 4 years, a little over 4 years, hanging out with street people, hanging out with poor families, hanging out with alcoholics and addicts, hanging out with business community, hanging out with people who worked in the office building.
Hmm.
My parish was outside the doors of the church. And what I found was that people learn how to deal with what they're given. And there are a lot of those homeless people who chose to be homeless because they didn't want the responsibilities that come with having a home. And that really surprised me. And my response to them was, well, that's fine, but you should not expect that people are going to take care of you because they're not.
Hmm.
You have made a decision to to not be as responsible as other people are who actually also need help. So it's
Hmm.
the dynamic is the same as it was 40 years ago when I was in that role, but it's much more complex now than it was then. And
Hmm.
but at the same time, and this is what I see here in Winston-Salem, is that the people have overcome or are overcoming the most difficult aspect of that, which is the things that divide us, um, are being addressed in such a way that we can find some way of working together, finding some level of unity so we can actually address these problems together.
I heard, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, was giving an example of how um, things can seem so unreachable. And he used the example of same-sex marriage, that there was a lot of energy around it, positive energy around it, there was negative energy around it, and kind of built up, and things build up to like a critical mass, and then they can just break through.
Yeah.
Like he said, no one would have predicted that same-sex marriage would be codified into law so quickly. And so if I take that sort of analogy and would apply it maybe to the housing issue, um, and you've mentioned, we're divided, and so it's going to take all of us to sort of not be so dug in, to what we think and think we know, um, and understand how people that live in my neighborhood, we need to start thinking about more density. Even if it's a mile down the road, we need to stop and think, well, people that need to live in apartments before they live in houses, that's just normal, and it's not going to detract. It's not a zero sum game.
Yeah.
If we have more housing, we have a better equipped economic workforce.
It's
But thinking about things a little bit differently, maybe some pedestrian type communities to be created that have all kinds of entry levels for different economic levels. So that there are some issues in town, that I'm hopeful around that. I know there's just a lot of good energy,
yeah,
but to break it through is going to take policy, persuasion, and perseverance. Um, and for everyone to kind of understand that all we all need to give a little bit to create a healthy community where everyone can thrive. Um,
Yeah,
and ho- yeah, yeah, hopefully, people really do get dug in, myself included, to notions and beliefs. Um, I was looking, I've got this book by Adam Grant, Think Again, that you can't read it I couldn't read it all at one time, but I chunk it up and I re-listen. I got it on audio because I like the book so much. And just his approach to people and issues is so hopeful and curious. And um, he really believes if you have the ability to rethink your positions, even if you don't change them, um, it makes for better relationships and better community. Because we're not going to change anybody's mind. Um, but we can be in relationship with someone and maybe they'll budge a little bit and you may never know it. But I mean, I have some personal stories where my in-laws did not come to my wedding because I had been married before, and that was just not okay in their world. They were very traditional Catholic family. And then, I joke and I say I became the favorite daughter-in-law. I don't think that's true, but it was the joke. I had a minister say, "So what is your nature? Would you keep your door open? And if they showed up, would you let them in?" And I said, "Yes, I
course,
would."
of course.
And well, I mean, I could have made it about myself and been all offended and been kind of angry and wanted to lash out and like, no, you can't see your grandchildren. But
But it would be
um,
denying the very values that are most important to you.
yeah, and I mean, and they both passed in the last 2 or 3 years, and I just loved them both to pieces. Phil's parents. So, but I mean, that's people's hearts can be open and they can change, and
That's right.
um, it's usually on their timetable and not yours. Um, so I kind of place those hopes on community issues and community goals.
And I share that with you. And
Yeah,
look forward to the rest of my life being here and seeing what the next 30 years will be like. So,
yeah,
so
yeah. Well,
and
I
it,
hope you'll stay.
I think I'm staying.
Good,
Yeah,
good.
I think I've done my last. I may not have moved into my last house, but I don't see um, moving anywhere else other, but staying here. And um, there's a lot to be said about that. But I'm increasingly with every week that passes more glad that I moved here, not knowing why I moved here other than I found a house to buy and promising myself when I was 18 years old that I was going to leave Winston-Salem and never return. And here I am back,
Here you are.
and I I really like the change that I've seen the community go through in the last half century. And and I still see ways for it to improve and still see ways for it to change. But that's
Mhm.
also my way of looking at things. But
Mhm.
when in meeting people like you and Ned and Bruce and others like you who have made a commitment to the community and who are starting a business to support other businesses in the community, I think that says a lot about where the energy for creating a better community is where it resides. So I'll give you this will be the last thing. I have this little phrase that I came up with because in my consulting work, I kept working with organizations where there was this split between the upper level management, the CEO, the C-suite, and the middle management and down. And the split was that these people saw themselves as short-termers, and then everyone down here was going to be there for a long time. And as I went through this experience of consulting with of a wide variety of these kinds of organizations, I realized that there was this persistent residual culture of values that persisted because it resided in the relationships of the people. And that defines what a community is. And I see that in places here, in pockets here, and that encourages me. So persistent residual culture of values that persist because it resides in the relationships of people really means this the community is as healthy as its commitment to the values that unite it as a community. And
Hmm.
and maybe that's um, still a question that needs to be answered. I don't know. I don't know what the values of Winston-Salem are. Um, I know that individuals have, and a lot of the business leaders have, and church leaders have their perce- perception of what those values are. But I don't know if we as a whole community have that sense of what our values are. And
Hmm.
so I don't know why I'm here. I still don't know why I'm here, but I'll let people know when I find that out.
Yeah.
And to a large extent, it's meeting people like you and others, and kind of learning what this community is and figuring out, okay, what do I have to offer? How do I contribute? How do I be more than just a homeless person who lives in a home, who has no connection to the community, who doesn't have anything to offer to the community because he's decided he doesn't have anything to offer to the community and just wants to take from it whatever he can get. That's not my perception at all about myself, but that's what a lot of people end up doing. So
Hmm.
so I think the challenge is how do we, in particular, draw people into a relationship where we are able to talk about what we value and how do we make that real for the whole community?
Yeah. I think a lot of that can depend on your position and your who you are, your education. And so I think for me, and I'm always failing, but the phrase power with versus power over
Yeah, I agree.
is a paradigm is a is a paradigm I think that can foster a lot of growth and change. Um, because if you ask people what they think and what they might come up with as a solution, or what might be a way to solve a problem or work together or do something fun, if you and I'm guilty of not doing this, and just learning, along the way. Um, and I do try to remind myself of that, because that it really is power with, and working with, and deciding with. And there might not be agreement, and somebody does have to make a decision, and sometimes that's really hard. But if you value what people have to offer and say, um, I think you can apply that to the broader community.
Yeah.
um yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think we could probably talk for just a lot longer. Maybe we'll have to one day.
Well, maybe we do that and
um
invite a bunch of people to join us in this conversation.
that'd be fun.
Absolutely.
That would be
Thank you.
fun.
Thank you, Tracy, for being with me
Oh,
today. It's been a real treat. And I really believe in what you all are doing. And however I can support you, I'll be glad to do that. So
well, I hope I run into you soon
you
again.
will. I'm sure you
So,
will.
and I'm grateful for the opportunity to know you.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. I hope that this inspires you to think about your own community and where the needs are and how you can step into being a contributor to the solutions. And it doesn't take much. It just takes personal initiative and deciding that you do want to make a difference. That's really all it takes, and then doing it. So thank you for watching the Eddie Network podcast, and we'll see you next time right here. Bye bye.